Okay, everyone. So first of all, we are going to be recording this. So if you don't want to have your pictures seen, turn your video off. It's my little note to you. Otherwise, feel free. It's nice to see some smiling faces. I am going to open up with our land acknowledgement. So we begin by acknowledging that we are in the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory and that the land on which we gather is in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and specifically the Fort William First Nation. I'm also going to have or share an inclusion statement, which is the Northwestern Ontario Writers' Workshop welcomes all persons, those of all ages, faith, political affiliation, of all races, all genders, those with disabilities, and those within the LGBTQIA+ community. We will not accept or tolerate discrimination or hate speech of any kind. We are listening and learning to improve our organization and to provide a safe and inclusive space for all. So today we are here for Graham Strong's workshop, getting us back to the basics of writing. May he help us kickstart 2021 and get us going again on our writing. I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. I am going to let you know there are a couple NOW events coming up. So on Saturday, January 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern, we have The Difference Between a Book and a Movie with Ken Ween. It's open to all. Feel free to join. There's also the Write-In Wednesday at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, January 27th. And lastly, just in case you don't know, our writing contest is officially open. So please work on your poetry and your short stories and get them into us by the end of February. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Graham. And oh, and one more thing before I pass that along. I am going to send a survey out later on if you want to answer a couple questions for us. Yeah, okay. So thank you so much. And Graham, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jodine. And hello, everybody. Welcome to the workshop. First of all, I'd like to thank the OAC for all their support for this workshop and for everything they do for now. This workshop today is Welcome to the Basics of Writing, how-to guide to help you start writing today. As Jodine said, I'm Graham Strong. I'm a full-time marketing writer and journalist. I'm a part-time aspiring novelist. And I've been writing pretty much my whole life and professionally for about half of that. So I've seen my share of blank pages. And what we're going to do today, I think, is try to help everyone overcome their fear of the blank page and get some writing done. So as you saw in the email this morning, this workshop is aimed at beginners, but there's a lot of tips here for experienced writers as well. As you'll find out, both beginner and experienced writers face some of the same challenges, such as reducing distractions and fighting writer's block. And I'm going to start this screen here. So we came up with this topic months ago because we were hearing from a lot of beginner writers that they wanted to learn the basics of writing. And that sounds pretty straightforward. But as I started putting together some ideas about the workshop, I realized that defining what the basics are is not as straightforward as you would think. For one thing, a lot of depends on the writing that you want to do. Learning to be a poet is different from learning to be a novelist, is different from learning how to be a creative nonfiction writer, and so on. What we wanted to do with this workshop is make it available to as many different writers as possible. So I couldn't just talk about, say, how to write a short story, because that would leave a lot of people out. But I realized that many writers, especially beginning writers, struggle with the same challenges when they get started. It doesn't matter if we're poets or fiction writers or memoirists. Even experienced and professional writers face several challenges every day, and they all revolve around common themes. So with this workshop, we're going to talk about the very, very basics of writing, no matter what kind of writer you want to be. I'm going to address common fears and doubts and other challenges. And more importantly, I'm going to give you solid, actionable strategies to overcome these challenges. Plus, I'll let you in on some secrets professional writers use to help them overcome the challenges they face. And we'll have lots of time at the end for specific questions and answers. So if you have anything that wasn't covered here, you can certainly ask and get some answers. But first, we're going to start with a quote. The rules of writing, there are 3 rules of writing for a novel. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. And this one always makes me laugh because it sort of addresses the paradoxes in writing. And writing has so many paradoxes. There may or may not be rules, and if there are, nobody can agree what those rules are. On top of that, the rules are different if you're writing poetry, short stories, and novels. Besides, we're always encouraged to break the rules anyway. So here's another paradox. As we'll see later in this workshop, writers are constantly fighting distractions, except that we're also constantly looking for any old excuse not to write as well. Then there are one of the biggest paradoxes, the one that causes the most problems in my mind, is that we need to get serious about our writing. But the problem is if we get too serious, we lose all creativity. Everything we talk about in this workshop will lead up to the paradox about getting serious about writing. No matter what type of writer you are, once you've mastered that paradox, you're well on your way to getting some good work done. The goal of this workshop then is to cover many of those same basic challenges and to give you some practical solutions on how to overcome them. I'm going to give you the tools to help you start writing a piece and finish it, no matter what type of writer you want to be. We're going to talk about setting your writing goals, making time to write, fighting distractions, conjuring a ritual, facing the blank page, that's writer's block, overcoming imposter syndrome, overcoming perfectionism, and giving yourself permission to play. I'll also address the serious versus creative paradox. In fact, we're going to start and end by talking about that. It boils down to this. There are some aspects in writing that you need to be serious and some aspects where you absolutely can't be. So how do you find that balance? I found it through something called serious fun. So what is serious fun? I define serious fun as taking a professional approach to scheduling writing time, but giving yourself permission to play with the words during that time. So what exactly does that mean? Well, here's the thing. Too many writers sit down to do serious writing. I know I was guilty of this for the longest time. It's obvious why writers do this. You sit down to write a short story or a poem or whatever. Of course you want to make it the best it can be. But here's the thing, concentrating on perfection actually makes it bad. It's kind of like watching someone get camera shy, and we've all seen that. One moment a person can be funny, outgoing, interacting with a group of people, but then someone says, hey, let's get this on video. Suddenly that person clams up, becomes self-conscious, and looks like they're trying too hard. Sitting down to do some serious writing produces the same sort of effect. Your writing becomes stilted and forced and unimaginative because you can't get out of your head. So serious fun breaks down to this. Be serious sitting down to write, but once you're sitting down, your job is to simply play with words. The more fun you have, the more original and imaginative your writing will be. I wanted to touch on this a little bit now because it might be easier for you to look at these 8 steps broken down into 2 parts of the paradox, the serious part and the fun part. So here we see on the serious side, it's the planning stages, setting up your writing goals, making the time to write, fighting the distractions, and conjuring the ritual. And then the fun part is facing writer's block, overcoming imposter syndrome, overcoming perfectionism, and giving yourself permission to play. Now, a lot of those things doesn't sound like fun actually, but trust me, it will be. We'll get there. So first, setting your writing goals. So what do you want to accomplish as a writer? Before we set our concrete goals, it's good to consciously decide what you want to accomplish in the long term as a writer. Some people want to write for a living, others want to write for a hobby. Still others have a specific writing project in mind. It's not crucial to know what your long-term goal is right this second, but what you decide will affect some of the points that coming up in the workshop. Regardless of your answer, a good way to start is to set a very specific goal. For example, writing contests are very popular. One big reason for this is because it gives you a definite deadline to finish your writing. I want to stop on this quote for a moment. If I waited for inspiration to strike, I'd never write a single bloody word. And that's from Mordecai Richler. And that exactly proves the point. You have to actually sit down and want to write rather than just wait for inspiration, because as Richler says, it's never going to come. So we've gone through this. No, we have not gone through this. So let's go through this quickly. So there are many different ways that you can approach it. You can become a professional writer, which a lot of people like to do. A lot of people want to do it just for fun. A lot of people want to do it for fun, but they want to improve as they go along as well. And some people have a specific project in mind that they want to finish, a memoir, a poem, a short story, or whatever they want to be writing. But back to the contest, as you know, you might have known that Now launched its 2021 writing contest, and this is actually a really good way to get started writing. It's the perfect goal. There are several categories, including poetry, short fiction, creative nonfiction, and the Bill McDonald Prize, and a category that changes every year. And this year, that category is haiku. Now, for those of you who already have a writing direction, such as poetry or short stories, the category is going to be pretty straightforward for you. But I will give you this one hint, though. If you're writing a short story and you base it in Northwestern Ontario, submit it to the Bill McDonald Prize instead of the short fiction category. The Bill McDonald category tends to get fewer submissions, so your chances of placing in the top 3 are much greater. So yes, that's a very easy and attainable goal, and I'll let you know that deadline is February 28th, so that gives you about 7 weeks or so, plenty of time. But in order to do that, you need to make some time to actually schedule some time to actually write. And I'm sorry, here we are, making time to write. So if you're simply looking for time, you're not going to find it. And here's a quote from Carmen Didi. The hardest part is making the time to write. Not finding the time to write, mind you, but making. You have to change your priorities and actually schedule some time for writing. So one of the first questions new writers ask is, how often should I write? Again, that directly relates to your writing goals as well as whatever else you have going on in your life. Full-time professional writers write every day. So if you want to be a professional writer, writing every day should be your goal. If you're doing it just for fun and you want to write once per week, that's absolutely fine. Other writers want to write in spurts. They'll write every day if they have a specific project in mind. And if not, they may not write at all. Here's a few writers and what they've done. So Hemingway once said that when he's writing a book or a story, he'll start writing at 6 a.m. He'd work until he got to a place where he knew what would happen next, so he could start writing right out of the gate the next day. He figured that was about 6 hours of writing every day or so. Then Maya Angelou said she wrote from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then worked on edits for the rest of the day. Stephen King said he writes 6 good pages per day. Ray Bradbury wrote a short story per week and read a short story every night before bed. And Alice Munro said she wrote 7 days a week from about 8 to about 11:30 in the morning and kept a very strict quota of pages. So you see, in just this small sample size, some of the writers committed to a specific number of hours, some to a specific number of pages, some wrote every day without fail, others wrote every day when they had a specific project in mind. And then in the case of Ray Bradbury, he had just the weekly quota, not the daily one, but he tended to write every day anyway. So the answer for you is, what works best in your life? Here are some suggestions. You can commit to working for X number of hours per day or week. You can write for X number of words per day or week. For example, you can write maybe 500 words every day or every week or whatever you want to do. You can plan to write an Instagram poem every day or week. Instagram is very popular, and there's a lot of Instagram poets out there. So that might be something that you're interested in doing, and it's pretty accessible. And you could write 32 hours per month, writing 4 hours every Saturday or every Sunday. I know at least one writer who does that, and that works very well for him. So basically, the schedule doesn't really matter, except that if you want to be a professional writer and plan to write every second Sunday, it might take you a while to get there. But what does matter in terms of motivating yourself to write is that once you do decide on a schedule, you stick to it. If you're going to write every day for an hour starting at 6 a.m., then write every day for an hour starting at 6 a.m. If you're going to write 3,000 words every Saturday to finish your novel, then write 3,000 words every Saturday to finish your novel. That being said, be open to changing your schedule as well, especially in the beginning. If you find that writing in the morning isn't working for you, you want to try writing at night instead, then go ahead and change it. If the time limit thing isn't working for you and you want to try working to a specific number of words every day, then you can change that up too. But tweaks aside, in order for a schedule to work, you need to commit to that schedule no matter what. But of course, that's not always easy. So we're going to talk about fighting distractions. No matter what, it's going to be tough some days. You'll have other priorities on the go, and there will be distractions. And here's what Irvin Welsh, the author of Trance, had to say about that. As a writer, you play this daft game with yourself. You're looking constantly for distractions, anything to stop you from writing, but you're constantly fighting the distractions to write as well. Another funny quote, I think, some days you'll not want to write at all, but if you schedule time for writing, it'll help you make writing a priority in your life. There's only one way you're going to reach, it's the only way you're going to reach your writing goals. So one of the things you have to do to start writing is to find ways of getting rid of distractions. Here's a few things that you can do. Have your own writing space, an office if you're able, or somewhere where you can close the door. Otherwise, try to find a quiet corner somewhere. Ideally, it'll be a spot where you don't do anything else. For example, the dining room table isn't great because you already associate that with eating. Besides, in most houses, dining room tables don't tend to be in the quietest of places. Set up a desk or table somewhere where you can sit down exclusively to write. Leave your cell phone in the next room. If you have a landline, don't have it near you in your writing space, or if you can, unplug it. Don't open your web browser. Otherwise, you'll be tempted to open Facebook, Twitter, the news, YouTube, and any number of greedy things that are itching to steal your time away. The only thing that should be open on your computer when you're writing is your word processor. And if you're writing by hand, all the better. Keep away all your electronics as far away from you as possible. Talk to your family and roommates so they understand what you're trying to do. It's helpful to sit down with anyone you're living with, spouse, kids, roommates, to explain that you need some undisturbed time to write. You can even give them your writing schedule ahead of time so they know when to leave you alone. Make writing a priority so you're not thinking about other things. The classic example of procrastination for writers is doing laundry. How can I write laundry when all that dirt, or how can I start writing when all that dirty laundry is there? Well, you have two options. If it's that important for you, you can make sure that you finish your laundry before, and otherwise, you can change your outlook. If you made the commitment to do the writing time, then switch it the other way around. You can say to yourself, how can I do all that laundry when I have all this writing to do? When you make writing a priority, not only are you giving it value in your life, you're consciously choosing to write at that moment. That makes it easier to ignore any distractions you have to write. writing becomes a distraction in itself. Listen to music or just put on headphones to block out sound. This is a helpful tip. I always write with music, but sometimes you might find music to be distracting. But either way, put the headphones on. Over the ear headphones work the best. And it's amazing how something as simple as headphones block out the rest of the world and help you get into your own headspace faster. Earbuds and even earplugs can work as well. If there are too many distractions, go elsewhere, like a library, a park, a coffee shop, in your car. This has to be managed well since there are often other distractions to contend with. But I've heard some writers say they can't write anywhere but a coffee shop because all the business around them sort of calms them down rather than distracting. But you'll have to find what works best for you. Conjure a ritual. We'll be talking about this next. But before we move on, I just want to say a final word about getting rid of distractions. Like Irvin Welsh said, we play this daft game with ourselves. Distractions will play into that like temptation. So the more successful we are at getting rid of distractions, the more successful we are at getting some work done. And a writing ritual will help you create a positive writing habit. So here's another quote from John Barth. And sorry, it's being blocked here. Oops. Sorry, I can't read the whole thing out loud. It's being blocked by all the other things, but basically it's saying that the rituals will help you help you get yourself into the trance state, as he calls it. This was actually a tough quote to find because when I was searching for one about creating a ritual, I was surprised that mostly what I found was the only ritual I have is to sit down and start writing. I thought that was a little ridiculous. Now, it's true that when you want to start, the best way to start writing is to actually start writing, which is kind of one of those circular paradox things as well. But it's not very helpful or instructional. It's like saying the best way to get better when you're sick is to get better. Okay, well, thanks for that. What we need are some concrete ways of getting ourselves ready to write. And I found that a ritual is one way that will help to do that. A ritual can help you get into your writing frame of mind, or the trance state, as Barth called it. I don't know about you, but when I'm writing, I'm usually not present in the real world. This may not be a great frame of mind for socializing, but it's essential for getting creative and getting some good work done. The ritual then becomes like a door you pass through from the real world to the place in your mind where you write the best. Distance yourself from distractions. Probably the more accurately, a ritual helps you ignore distractions. Like the first point, as you pass through the writing frame of mind, you're less likely to become distracted anyway. You know what it's like when you're zoned in on something. It's hard to draw attention away. In a more literal sense, you can actually make getting rid of distraction part of your ritual, hiding your phone, closing your web browser, shutting the door, and so on. Rituals also help you form a positive writing habit over time. So over time, the ritual will help you commit even more to your writing. It's kind of like a baby step. You don't say, oh, I'm going to write. Because if you say that, our brain is going to start playing that daft game with us again and say, oh, really? Do you think so? And then you end up checking out what's on TV instead. The ritual tricks your brain into thinking it's doing something it really wants to do. Maybe your ritual is to make a cup of that special grind coffee you have in the cupboard, waiting just for writing. That sounds nice, doesn't it? So you're not writing, you're just having a cup of coffee. But then once you've made that coffee, you've committed to sitting down and writing. There's no going back at that point, no matter what your brain tells you. Wake your muses and get your creativity flowing. This is similar to the first point, but with an important difference. You can be in your writing frame of mind, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the creativity is flowing yet. It's like starting a car in the winter. You can get in it, but you have to start it to let it warm up. A ritual helps you do both things. In a way, a ritual is almost like Pavlov's dog, that famous experiment in which Pavlov taught a dog how to salivate by ringing a bell every time he fed it. By the end of the experiment, the dog would salivate at the ringing of the bell, even if there wasn't any food around. And that's kind of what we want to do. We want to trick our minds to start thinking creatively with some positive reinforcement. There's a term for it, classical conditioning or something. I really don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I do know that rituals work for me. I have a ritual for when I'm working on a novel. I brew some tea, and lately it's been London fog, and I get myself 2 novel writing cookies. Yes, I call them novel writing cookies. These are Voortman fudge striped oatmeal cookies that I eat only when I go down to write a novel. And that's important. I need to keep them special because if they were any old cookie, they wouldn't have the same effect. Here's Stephen King talking about his ritual. I have a glass of water or a cup of tea. I sit down somewhere from 8 to 8:30 every morning. I have my vitamin pill and my music, sit in the same seat, and the papers are all arranged in the same places. Doing these things the same way every day says to my mind, you're going to be dreaming soon. So how do you make a ritual? I know it sounds easy, but there are a few key things to include that will really help you make it work. Make your ritual something you enjoy, not something you dread. There's that scene in the Da Vinci Code where the Opus Dei guy straps on that striped belt around his thigh to prove his dedication to the cause. This, I found, is counterproductive for writers. Your writing ritual should be something more associated with reward than punishment. Make it special, like those novel writing cookies I have. Again, it's positive reinforcement. You have something reserved only for when you're writing, and it's a treat of some sort. It's a double whammy. Now, when I say treat, it doesn't have to be a cookie or candy or something sweet like that. You could have a special tea or coffee. Maybe it's a particular apple that you eat, or broccoli salad if that's your idea of something special. And it doesn't have to be something to eat or drink at all, just something that makes you happy and that will help you get in the right frame of mind. Involves some sort of physical activity. You don't have to make this a workout. The physical part could be something as little as making tea. Many writers go for a walk or do push-ups. You could take a shower, put on special clothes, rearrange a set of Star Wars figurines on your bookshelf. Anything that gets your body moving in a precise and somewhat repeatable manner. This will help your mind go into its trance state. And as an aside, you may have heard of things called tea rituals. And I believe it's often as much a physical act of making the tea in the same precise steps that helps relax the body. I'm certainly no expert, but look it up if you're interested. You might find something inspirational there. Do roughly the same thing every time. And this is important as well. For example, don't decide one day you're going to go for a walk and the next day that you're going to make tea. You can certainly do both. Many people go for a walk when they're stuck, for example, and that's great. But in terms of a ritual, make it the same activity every time. Again, it's the repetition as much as the doing. And that being said, if you find one thing isn't working, by all means, try a different one. Don't multitask during your ritual, like texting or reading the news. Your mind will be losing focus. Your mind should be losing focus with the world around you, and you should be starting to turn inward. You want to fall away from the world, not involve yourself with it. That includes talking with other people. Avoid people when you're doing a ritual if you can. Well, this, of course, can be difficult sometimes if you're living with other people. Think about what you might want to write today. You can start by thinking about what you wrote yesterday. You can start thinking about your characters. Anything really you can start thinking about. Anything that gets your mind working and start the creativity flowing. The whole idea is to purge your mind of daily thoughts and start putting yourself in that trance or dreamlike state to write. So we're going to do a little writing exercise, and it's going to be pretty simple and very fast, actually. We're going to set goals and a schedule. And don't worry if you haven't had time to consider everything yet. Just write something down. The idea is really just to start planning now. You can adjust those plans upon future reflection. And this shouldn't take too long, so we'll just give you a few minutes here to dive in. Okay, I can't really see everyone. It looks like some people might be still writing, others are finished. So I think we'll move on from here, and you can always finish up your schedules and all your planning at a later time. So now we're going to move into the fun side of things. And that is filling the blank page is our first thing. Now, again, this doesn't sound like fun, but we're going to make it fun. That's the whole point. Hemingway didn't believe in the power of the blank page. And really, what did he have to lose? Compared to walking through the savannas of Africa, entering the bull rings in Spain, hopping from war to war as a correspondent, what was the worst thing that could happen to him when faced with a blank page? Absolutely nothing. You're right. No one ever got trampled or gored or shot by a blank piece of paper. And there's a lesson in that for all of us, I think. The fear of the blank page is only what you make it. None of us has anything to lose. Now, I'm not dismissing the blank page entirely. Facing the blank page is a big part of why we're here tonight. It is a common fear for beginners and professionals alike. And I want to emphasize that even experienced full-time writers get scared by the blank page. In fact, it's so common, there's a name for it, writer's block. Now, I'm not a big fan of that phrase. I think it's a little inaccurate. I think it's a little inaccurate, but it's a catch-all phrase. I think that sort of describes many different things that are happening either separately or together. And let's go over a few of them here. So not being able to think of anything to say, that's one of the biggest ones. Having something to say, but not really ready to say it. Imposter syndrome, which we're going to talk about in a bit. Being too serious about your writing, which we're talking about throughout here. Distractions, that's a big one. Fear of failure, fear of success, self-doubt, anxiety over other parts of your life. There's that laundry thing again. And many other factors. But whatever you call it, the result is the same. You're not putting down words on papers. And this is how Hemingway would solve the problem. All you have to do is write one true sentence. Write the truest sentence that you know. Now, this is a pretty famous quote from him, but I've always found it's a little cryptic, so maybe I'll explain it by giving some background. In his memoir, A Movable Feast, about his Paris days, Hemingway talks about sitting in a cafe one morning and with nothing in particular he wanted to say. He was blocked, if you want to call it that. But of course, he had to write something because it was his writing time. So he tried to think of one true sentence, which he described as something he heard or read or knew. Something that obviously struck a chord with him. When he thought of it, it would spark his imagination, and then he would start writing. The story is a little fanciful. Hemingway has been accused of revisionist history in The Movable Feast. We have to take this revelation of his with a grain of salt. But I think the lesson is still valid. Find your one true sentence and you can start. To me, the one true sentence is that kernel of truth that inspires you. Another writer, Abby Emmons, says that in order to write, you have to write with a truth that you want to scream from the rooftops. Essentially, it's a theme of what you want to write. What's the truth? What truth do you care about so deeply that you have to share with everyone? What makes you happy or angry or sad? Another way to put it is, why do you want to write this story or poem or whatever you're about to write in the first place, and why should the reader care? For example, Mark Twain wrote The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn because he wanted to talk about the immorality of racism. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote the Great Gatsby because he wanted to show the hypocrisy of the American dream. And these ideas were so important to these two writers that they became the respective themes of these books. Now, I know a lot of you out there are thinking right now, what the hell is my theme? And again, this explanation sounds deceptively simple in theory, but in practice, we don't always know off the top of the heads what truth we will care about deeply enough to write. Usually we don't even think about it in terms of theme though. Usually what we talk about is something very simple like, what do I want to write? A lot of fighting the blank page is deciding what we want to write about. In fact, it's probably most of it. Remember when we listed some of the causes of writer's block at the beginning, first thing on the list was not being able to think of anything to say. It's an important decision. Like Abby Emmons said, it's something you should something you should want to shout from the rooftops. It also has to be something the reader is going to care about. It starts with that one kernel of truth that resonates with us. It starts with your one true sentence. So how do you find it? Well, here's some practical ways to find your one true sentence. You can start by writing a memory from childhood, something that was emotionally charged or maybe even painful. You can write a story about a news item that you heard recently that struck you as important. You can find a writing prompt. This is quite popular. Chapters has books and books of them, but it's easy enough to find something online as well. Start writing a passage from a book, a poem, or a movie that you remember until you can't really remember any more of it. Then just start making it up. Write down that dream that you had, either recently or it could be a dream from your past. Write down a conversation that you heard, then start making it up once you get to the end. Write a letter. You can write a letter to the editor, write a letter to your mother, or to anyone you like. You're not going to send it necessarily. Just write the letter as if you're describing something that happened to you recently. Again, these things in themselves may or may not be stories, poems, blog posts, or whatever you ultimately are going to write. But the idea here is simply to get the words down. Think of it as warming up a car. Just write the sentence after sentence, or if you're writing poetry, write line after line. You don't really have to think about what you're writing, and don't analyze what you're writing before you write it down. It's kind of like brainstorming. Just write down whatever comes to mind. At some point, you're going to find your one true sentence, or at least a sentence that will spark your imagination and take you somewhere that you want to go. Then you can focus all your efforts towards writing that piece. So we see that there are many reasons why filling the blank page can be difficult, and many reasons why we have so-called writer's block. Not knowing what to say is a biggie, but even once we've found that, there are other meanies lurking in the dark. Imposter syndrome is one of those. And I chose this one because it's something that affects new and experienced writers alike. And here's Maya Angelou on the subject. I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find me out. And here's another writer you may have heard of. Much of what we set out to accomplish ends in failure, at least in our own eyes. Advice for the innocent pilgrim. You never step into the same river twice. The vast empty spaces of the blank page appall, and everyone walks into the maze blindfolded. Margaret Atwood. Well, if Margaret Atwood gets imposter syndrome, I think there's hope for us all. In full disclosure, I heavily edited this quote. I edited it for length and clarity, and actually it's 2 quotes, but it's all Atwood's words, and it keeps to the spirit of what she was saying. And I quoted both these writers on purpose to underline that every writer faces imposter syndrome at some point or another, no matter how famous or successful they are. This is something that most beginner writers don't understand. They think they are feeling like imposters because they are new. That's not so. In actual fact, feeling like an imposter is proof that you're a real bona fide writer. So what is imposter syndrome? The term is mostly self-explanatory, but let's be crystal clear. It's that feeling that writers get that make them say to themselves, who the hell do I think I am, and why would anyone want to read what I have to say? It really comes down to self-doubt. And again, it comes from a place of seeming common sense. It's difficult to read someone like Margaret Atwood and wonder why someone would pick up your book instead of hers. But can you write? How could you write after thinking about that? But here's the thing. Writers do it every day. That self-doubt you're feeling isn't common sense after all. Choose any writer who's won the Giller Prize in the last 10 or 20 years and dollars to notice they've read Atwood, and they still sat down to fill up that blank page. And hey, they even won a Giller. And for those writers, there are 1,000 more who wrote and didn't win the Giller Prize, but they won some other prize, or they got published, or they had their work recognized in some other way. And that's why another reason why you should be entering writing contests to start with. When you win, they're good validation. You may not win every time, but the more you submit, the better you get, the better chances you'll have. I don't know any writer who's worked on their goals for any length of time and didn't get recognition for their work in some way. It may not come today or tomorrow, but keep at it and it will come, even if your name isn't Atwood. If the imposter syndrome was just some casual passing feeling, I probably wouldn't mention it in this workshop. But the thing is, it stops writers from writing. They sit down to the blank page and self-doubt starts to creep in. And the crazy thing is, writers get worried about what people are going to think about the work before they've even written a word. There's no way you could even ever know how good or bad it is either, because it doesn't exist yet. So here's a few concrete steps to avoid imposter syndrome from stopping your work. Focus on your own work, not what other writers are doing. If this reminds you of being back in school, eyes on your own paper, then good. It was great advice then, and it's great advice now. You're not in competition with other writers. You're doing your own thing. In fact, if there's any competition, it's with yourself. Again, with those daft games that Irvin Welsh was talking about. Think about what you want to say, not how other writers might say it. Consider the fact that comparisons are useless. For example, who's a better writer, Margaret Atwood or J.K. Rowling, or Dr. Seuss, or Shakespeare? The reality is they're all completely different writers, and for the most part have completely different audiences. And they all have readers who will say that they're the best. And most importantly, there's room in the world for all 4 of these writers and many, many more. Remember all those times when you said to yourself, I could have written that? We've all come across published words that we've shaken our heads at, wondering, how did they get published? Sometimes it borders on confusion, despair, even anger. How does that person get published when I can't? Well, you have an opportunity to prove you can do better every time you sit down to write. Please yourself first. This is one of the best ways of helping you shake off imposter syndrome. Because you know what? Nobody can write the way that you do. Nobody can write the topics you want to write in the way that you want to write them. Find your story, find your one true sentence, and using the words you want to use, and you can never go wrong. Use the same techniques as you use for the blank page. Imposter syndrome is a distraction in itself. So do the same things you do to get rid of distractions. Follow your ritual, get into a trance, write out your words. Do this over and over enough times and you'll train yourself not to think about it anymore. So to recap, you're not in competition with any other writers. All comparisons are useless anyway. And nobody can write the way you write. So please yourself first. Overcoming perfectionism. Perfectionism is a close cousin to imposter syndrome. It's the irrational thought that everything you should write should be pure gold flowing from your pen every time you sit down to write. Not only that, but anything less than pure gold is total failure on your part. I'm going to turn to Hemingway again to answer this one. The first draft of everything is expletive. So in other words, the exact opposite of pure gold. Part of the problem, once again, is that writers are approaching their writing too seriously. But another part of the problem has to do with expectations. More specifically, writers' unrealistic expectations. Let's look at it this way. The pottery analogy. My wife is a potter. She makes all these incredible mugs and bowls and Christmas ornaments from clay. I'm always amazed at how she does it. I mean, I know how she does it, and in fact, reviewing the steps for making pottery is a good way to look at writing, at least from the creative standpoint. Step 1, take a lump of clay and throw it on the wheel. Step 2, form that clay into whatever it is you're making, and let's say, for example, a vase. Step 3, fire the vase in the kiln. Step 4, glaze your vase with whatever colors and patterns and drawings you'd like. And step 5, fire the vase one more time. Then you open the kiln lid like it's Christmas and see what comes out. Sounds straightforward? So let me ask you this. Do you think potters should expect their clay to just turn into a vase the moment they throw it onto the wheel? Does that make sense to you at all? It's so many writers get discouraged when they can't do essentially the same thing. Whatever you put down on paper first is most often not what's going to end up on the paper. It's that first draft. That first draft is just throwing a lump of clay down onto the wheel. It's not supposed to look like a vase at this point. And if it did, it would be pretty freaky. Also, like imposter syndrome, perfectionism can stop you from writing. You freeze up because you're worried that you won't be writing perfectly right from the start. Worse, it's like a snowball effect. When you freeze up, it becomes an opportunity for all those other writer block causes to creep in, like fear and self-doubt. So as often happens, this one little bump in the road cranes you off the edge. But there are solutions to perfectionism as well. And here are a few ways that you can overcome it. Just write. Yes, once more, one of those pat answers for a complex question, but I'll delve a little deeper. If you can focus on just getting words down on the paper without thinking too much about them, you're going to be much better off. Again, it's like brainstorming, the brainstorming thing we talked about before. Your first draft should only have one goal: fill the page. You can worry about editing and writing the words after. Don't stop to read what you've written. This is a surefire way to lose all your momentum. No matter what, resist the temptation to read while you're writing, even if you've lost your train of thought. Just put down words on paper. You can edit it all another time. In fact, promise yourself you won't read anything until tomorrow. Now, there's two main reasons for this. One, you're much more likely to have an objective opinion of your work if you let it sit overnight. Two, and this is the most important in terms of perfectionism stopping your writing, if you read it too early, you may not like what you read and get discouraged. This is going to stop you from wanting to write quick. I've written things and then read them right away. Sometimes I think it's the best thing I've ever written. Sometimes I think it's the worst. And when I say sometimes, I don't mean in terms of different piece of writing at different times. I'm talking about the exact same piece of writing read just a few minutes apart. Excuse me, 1 minute it's gold, the next it's, well, it's like Hemingway said. The point is, you cannot be objective about your writing in the moment, whether you're a beginning writer or not. So do yourself a favor. Don't put yourself through the misery. Instead, put the writing away. Remind yourself that you can and you will rewrite it. This is a first draft. First drafts are meant to be rewritten. You're throwing down a lump of clay and nothing more. As soon as you let go of all your unrealistic expectations, you'll find that the words flow much faster. As usual, the roots of perfectionism and its solutions are in psychology. You're playing a game with yourself. I think it makes it easier to overcome when you realize this. Perfectionism isn't real, at least in terms of external to you. Nobody is expecting perfection except you. But the effects of perfectionism can be very real. Coming to terms with your own perfectionism and learning how to let yourself make mistakes is very freeing. You're going to make mistakes, so give yourself a break. Just remember that you will also give yourself the opportunity to fix those mistakes in the drafts to come. Giving yourself permission to play. This almost seems anticlimactic, doesn't it? I promised you at the end of the workshop, I'd show you how being too serious about your writing can actually hurt you. But I hope by this point, you're already seeing that what happens based on everything we've covered so far. That being said, I want to drive home this point. Being creative means having fun. Or to put it another way, having fun is the only way you're going to be creative. When I sit down to write a book, I do not say to myself, I'm going to produce a work of art. That's George Orwell. And that's it in a nutshell. If you're going to go into a writing session with the plan to write the next great Canadian novel, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Don't get me wrong, each one of us has the opportunity to write the great Canadian novel, poem, whatever, but the approach is everything. I think part of the problem is that writing is literally the most literal art. We have this strange expectation of these words flowing in our head will form perfect sentences in front of us. We see words as something solid, something we can grasp and put onto paper in perfect order like a ticker tape. If only we could be serious for a moment and concentrate. But words are never solid like clay on a wheel or paint on a canvas. In fact, when you think about it, and once again, paradoxically, writing is actually the most ephemeral of art, as well as the most literal. Words are wisps of thoughts in our brains, bits of glowing pixels on our computers, lines of ink on our pages, all representing some vague idea we want to capture. Words are nothing but a collection of symbols magically representing ideas. If we get too serious about grabbing those words floating in our heads, we're going to fail. We need to play with the words. I'll say it again, having fun is the only way you're going to be creative. And here are a few ways that you can move away from the serious and into the fun. Sit down to write with an open mind. You're not writing the next great Canadian anything. You're writing whatever words come to you, good or bad. You'll decide what they are actually later. Expect greatness won't come until later. And again, back to Hemingway, expect no gold will flow from your pen while you're filling the blank page. Don't write seriously, edit seriously. The best ideas come when you're having fun and basically brainstorming your story or poem or whatever you're writing. The thing is, you won't recognize those words as your best ideas until you're editing them later. Don't decide to submit a piece until after it's done. That way you can just play. If it looks good after all your writing, great. Decide to submit it somewhere. But if it doesn't, that's great too. You had fun and experience writing it. Just start writing something different. Don't worry about wasted words. You're going to cut words. You'll cut sentences and paragraphs. You'll cut thousands and thousands of words in your lifetime. But even so, there's no such thing as wasted words. Even the words you cut somehow affected the words you kept. And that means your work is going to be better in two different ways. It's better for being trimmer because you got rid of those words, but it's also better for the way those cut words improved the words that did stay. So now for our last writing exercise, I thought we'd go over some main points that we covered in this section and start making a plan for the next time we sit down to write. Then I have an additional few tips, and then we're going to move on to some questions. I'll give everyone maybe a little bit more time with these because the answers are a little more involved. Oops, sorry. Okay, once again, it's a little difficult to see where everyone is, but I assume that we're all done. We'll move on for here. So I just have a few other tips I thought might help the beginning writer and will help experienced writers as well, I think. So the top 3 tips that I have: join a writers group. And I can't tell you how helpful this is. Meeting and talking with other writers helps you improve as a writer and gives you a sense that you're not writing alone. This also inspires you to write. If you're trying to be a writer, doesn't it just make sense to hang out with other writers? Learn to type faster. Sure, a lot of writers over the years have succeeded with the hunt and peck method. And personally, I found that sometimes the ideas and words come to me faster than I can get them down. If you learn to type faster, you're less likely to run into this problem. Plus, you're also less likely to think about where your fingers are going for what letters. You're going to disrupt your writing flow if you have to stop and think about where the W is each time. And then read. This one almost goes without saying, but it's easily the single most important tip for all writers. Reading is almost like exercise for your brain when you're not writing. Not only that, you learn so much from other writers about story structure, technique, voice, and more by just reading. And I'm going to go back to Stephen King for this last slide here. If you want to be a writer, you must do two things above all: read a lot and write a lot. There's no way around these two things that I'm aware of, no shortcut. And there's actually one last thing I want to mention before we go. It's this: have fun. Play with words, frolic with phrases, write because you enjoy it. Then go back and see if it's something worth showing to other people. If it's not, write it some more, edit and polish and rewrite it to the point that people will like it. But through the whole process, the goal is always to have fun. It's that old adage, smiling increases your face value. Well, enjoying your writing process will increase your book value, and your readers will thank you for it too. Thank you.
Great job, Graham. I appreciate your presentation today. I'd like to open the floor to any questions that we may have for Graham.
Yeah, once again, I wanted to give a lot of time here for questions, because the basics of writing, it's so broad and so many people have so many different questions that I found in past workshops that having some more time for a Q&A sort of is very beneficial. So what you can do, you can type in the chat if you like. Otherwise, you can unmute yourself and ask through Zoom, and either way, we'll get your questions answered. Anyone?
On that first, yeah, Phil here, on that first quiz, were we supposed to actually type things right on the screen?
Oh, no.
Oh,
That was just
okay.
a prompt. Yeah, just to write them down with your pictures. I don't think there's even a way to do that.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of cool if there was.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, if you want to see those questions, what I can do is get those into a PDF or something that we'll post once we post the video as well.
I have a question, Graham.
Sorry, what's that?
I just said I have a question.
Oh, perfect. What's your question?
Advice for someone who starts and stops the same subject material over and over and over. And obviously I'm talking about me, you know.
Oh, you're not asking for a friend?
It's like, how do you know when to just call it and shelve the project that just haunts you versus you know, just pushing through? I guess that's the biggest challenge that I have is the idea of like pushing through and not giving up with this, as you say, you know, this need to be fun and loose with your writing style.
Well, that's a long and complex question. It's going to have a long and complex answer. That's something that I think you're going to learn over time, but some hints to start with. One of the first things you can do is just put it away. You know, if you're sitting there and you're rewriting and you're rewriting and you're rewriting, you're spinning your wheels. And a lot of the times when you're spinning your wheels, it's because you don't really know what direction to go in. And it's almost like, well, I need to work on it, so I got to keep writing it until I'm happy with it. But you know, at some often, and it happens to me all the time too, I'll go, okay, I don't like that, so I'll keep writing it. And I have to consciously say to myself, okay, look, it's not working, let's put it down, you know, for a day or a week or a month or whatever, depending on what the project is, and go back to it later. So I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that if you're constantly rewriting it and revisiting it, there might be something that's inherently wrong with what you're trying to say. And what I mean by that, again, it's sort of that one true sentence. You might not know exactly what it is you want to say. And I've come across this myself quite often, even in my day job works. You know, if I'm writing an article for a newspaper and I'm trying to write the article, sometimes I'm just going in circles and I don't really know what's happening, and I'll stop and I'll realize it's because I don't know what I want to say. I don't know what the point of this article is. You know, it's not that I don't understand the story, it's that the story might have 17 different angles or might have different implications for different people. What I got to do is decide, what is the core of this story? What is it that I'm trying to say? What's the most important thing about this story? And then once I go back and I stop and I think about it and I find that one core thing, that one true sentence, all of a sudden the article just comes together. So yeah, so there's a couple of different things you can do, and it really depends on what the situation is. A third thing I'll mention too is that, and I'm guilty of this as well, is sometimes you rewrite to the point where you know, you shouldn't be. You should have stopped a long time ago, and sometimes that's because it's a fear of saying, okay, I'm finished, I'm going to send it to someone to read, because that's scary. Sometimes it's well, there's a lot of different reasons why it happens, but you know, what you got to do in that situation is just to say, okay, look, it's done. I compare it to almost like over kneading the bread. I don't make bread by any means, but I know that over kneading is a bad thing. And that's what happens with my writing sometimes, is that I've over kneaded it. It's too overworked. It's falling apart. So yeah. So it really depends on what the situation is, and you got to kind of evaluate. Another good thing you can do, another way you can avoid, or not avoid that, but solve that problem, is that, you know, maybe give it to someone else to read. Yeah, even if it's a draft, you know, you're not sending it out, but you know, someone you trust, can you say, you just say, can you read this for me? And, you know, what's wrong with it? What's right with it? And, you know, giving and taking criticism, that's a whole different workshop. But, you know, if you can give it to someone you trust to review, they can usually point you in the right direction, or at least give you some hints. Does that answer your question?
If I can add to that,
Oh,
Grant,
perfect.
would be when you set it aside in your journal, write down, you know, next day, the next week, whenever it happens, you get some idea or thought right about that story or play, write it down in your journal so the next time you go back, you can use that.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I don't have a journal, but what I do is I almost always have my phone with me, and that when I'm not at my desk anyway. That's the other thing. I do put my phone away when I'm writing. I don't ever have it. And people who know me know not to text me, because they're not going to get a hold of me because I'm writing. But when I'm away from the desk, what I'll do is instead of a journal, I'll just email myself the note, and that way it's in my email. But Phil, you're right. Journal is perfect. You know, there's a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. Journal is a perfect way to do that, to collect your thoughts. Basically, any little way you can collect your thoughts, especially if you're working with something and you come up with an idea for it, make sure you have a system of jotting it down somehow. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Phil.
And maybe one problem is if you're writing fiction, do you really know who your main character is? I know that was something that I struggled with in my first draft. Took a workshop with Susan Olding, and she said, who is your main character? And boy, I thought, yeah, really, which one is it? And I had to put it away for a while because I thought, I really got to figure this out. So yeah, so that could be part of it, getting in the way as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's as I say, there's a ton of different ways. If you're writing fiction and you don't know your characters, that's gonna trip you up sometimes as well. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good point. Thanks.
Hi, Graham. It's Louise. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hi, Louise. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I have a question for you. First of all, this is the first time I take any course of any kind.
Oh, wow. Welcome.
Thanks to Vera, my sister-in-law, had pointed me to your direction, but I've been writing for a long, long time since I can. Anyway, my question to you is, I'm a very organized person, but when it comes to writing, I have so many ideas, and it's almost like I'm afraid that if I don't write it down, like I'm working on several different little things. So I've got this novel that I've been working on for like 10 years. And you know what? I'm okay with taking my time till I feel like I'm ready for it. But then I have this idea of something else and this other idea. I'm not a very scattered person. Like I said, this is totally not normal for me because everything I do is very organized.
Yeah.
Of course, life for me, I always have to push it aside, but I like the idea of all the suggestions you gave, carving out time for yourself. And so if I have to start working, at 7 in the morning, my regular job, then yeah, I will get up at 6, and which I always do, but I usually just need to wake up for half an hour. But maybe the other half hour that I am awake, that could be my carving time, of course. But how do you go about where you have all these ideas? And I always have, I write faster than I type, even if I do work and with my typewriter every day, because I find if I type, I'll waste my time. My writing is quicker. That's the way I go about it. But to have everything scattered because I'm afraid I'm going to lose my thought, what do you suggest? How could somebody sort of organize themselves to not lose the momentum of having some ideas? I'm not saying I want to finish 8 projects at once, but is it okay to be writing because I'm thinking this is cool idea, and I always jot it down. I don't do sentences. I just pin, short form so I don't forget what I'm thinking.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of thoughts about that.
Well, that's good. I mean,
yeah, I think, what you were talking about is that you're rigid in carving out time for yourself, but scattered in your writing. Scattered is just another way of saying that you're being creative. So I think you're doing exactly what I was kind of saying here is that, be strict in carving out your writing time, but once you're writing, do, follow your instincts, follow your creativity, do what you want to do. Now there is a certain point where, as you say, you don't mind not finishing a project right away, or you don't mind 8 projects on the go. So that goes back to what I was saying originally about, what are your long-term goals? Do you want to be a professional writer? Do you want to get something published? Do you want to finish a specific project? Or, is this something that you're just happy going into the gardening shed and pottering around with for a while? Because that's great too.
Yeah.
So if you are happy just pottering around with the words, then, what you're doing right now is fine. If what you're saying is that you want to find a way to finish a project, I'd have to understand more to give you specific advice. But off the top of my head, I would say that, if you are looking for something to finish, then pick the thing that talks to you most. Is it your novel? Is it one of those other projects? And then focus on that. Another approach could be, instead of taking the one that speaks to you most, take the one that is going to be finished first.
I never thought of that. The novel is longer while these short stories are quicker in a way. So these little stories, short stories, because it's like all these thoughts and I'm just writing them down, I don't want to forget them. And every time, I got to go back, I got to find where I put that binder because I had that storyline going. So I guess once I have all that on, then decide, okay, well, what do I do? This one's shorter. Do I work towards that? Kind of not get that out of the way, but in a way, yes, get it out of the way so that clears the air sort of thing. Well, that's good. Well, thank you.
No problem. I would add to that. I wouldn't call it getting it out of the way. I would call it an easy win. Easy wins are in my mind are huge for writers. But again, because so many people get discouraged so easily, and they feel like that that they're, well, again,
Yeah.
going back to what I talked about, the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome and all that stuff.
Yeah.
If you can get a good fast win, then that's a little boost. It doesn't sound like you
Yeah.
need that in particular, but
Yeah.
in general for writers,
Yeah.
the
And
easy
start getting up at 5 o'clock again.
win.
It's okay. We
Well,
can live with a few hours less.
yeah,
But,
exactly.
yeah.
Whatever
Okay, well,
works.
thank you. It's not just me being a scattered brain when I'm so organized in my normal life, it seems. So it's okay, that's good. That's some kind of validation. That's good for me.
Yeah. But maybe having that scattered, as you put
Yeah.
it, scattered writing area, maybe that's the counterpoint to you being so structured in other points and having to be
Yeah.
so structured in other parts of your life. So,
Yeah.
that's good too. Yeah.
No, that's good. That's
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the question.
It's Tessa. Can I make a comment about rituals?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Go right ahead.
I've been reading different writing books, and one of them, and I can't remember which one, but they suggested doing some creative play before you start your writing, and whether that involves toy soldiers or coloring or sculpting or just something that stimulates your brain, gets your sort of puts you in that zone.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was the whole reward system, rewarding yourself. I have a bar of Belgian chocolate in my freezer waiting for me to write something.
There you go. That'll do it. Yeah, a lot of people like to keep their rewards for after the writing. I'm more of a, and I don't see it as a reward necessarily. It's something that, is special, as a treat, is something pleasurable, as opposed to, if you don't write today, then you're not going to get this or you're not going to get that or whatever. So, and really, ultimately, it comes down to whatever works for you most. That's what you do. So, and I'm sorry, Tessa, what was your first point again?
Oh, about creative play.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Before
I had a thought on that too. Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think anything that gets your head into the right frame of mind to be writing is good. And again, it's exactly what I talked about. Writing is play, and so if you're doing some other kind of play, that's a good way to start as well. There's Lego actually has they call it, I can't remember what they call it, but it's basically a way for business people to connect with their own thoughts by playing with Lego and that sort of thing. So it's sort of a lateral thinking exercise. And again, it goes back down to play. You're playing, and really play is a very natural way to learn things. That when we're kids, we play the most, and the play isn't just frivolous. It's how we explore the world. And if we translate that to writing, play is how we explore our stories, our characters, our minds. So I think it's vitally important to play. So yeah.
Well, I think the other part of it too is that, if you're going to do creative play, you need to set yourself a timer so that, once you get into that mind space, then you're able to go from, let's say, your coloring book to your keyboard.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
As opposed to, getting lost in whatever it is you're doing and 2 hours later.
There's certainly that danger. Yeah, you want to avoid that the ritual shouldn't become a distraction in itself. That's perfect. Thanks, Tessa. Any other questions out there at all?
So my question is going to be, if we are to be writing and to be reading at the same time, what books do you recommend to get us started?
So you mean just in general reading? You know what,
The motivation. Yeah.
well, for motivation, if you're talking about motivation, it's always good to read the books in the genre that you're writing. So if you are writing fantasy, then it's pretty obvious to be reading fantasy. You're going to be, like I mentioned in the workshop, the reading always, reading other writers helps you learn, how they approach story and how they approach, how they phrase different things. You just you pick up things. But there's no, I was actually reading some studies over the last couple of years about reading, and everyone kind of assumed that if you're reading, then the best reading to do is, the highfalutin stuff, the literature and this and that. And they found that that's actually not the case. Especially for kids, it doesn't really matter what they read. It's the act of reading. They could read the back of cereal boxes, and they're going to get stuff from that they wouldn't get if they didn't read. So it doesn't much matter what you read. But there's also, and that's something I wanted to mention as well, and for some reason didn't, is that depending on what type of writing you're doing, like short stories or poetry or creative nonfiction, anything, search online and find there's a million resources out there. And that's another reason why I didn't really want to get too far into that with this workshop, is that, there are a lot of supports out there. There's writers groups, which I touched upon, but there's also, books out there. There's blogs, there's videos. The one writer that I mentioned, Abby Emmons, she's a pretty young writer, but she has this YouTube channel, and every week she puts out a new video about writing, and she's got some really good insights. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people like her that will especially if you're looking for a particular genre, seek out people like that. Yeah.
So I have a question. Oh, sorry, Jody, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just going to say, it's really interesting, right? We live in the digital age. So finding, other people online, like you had mentioned, even Abby, to recommend or to inspire or whatnot. It's not just, I guess, reading, but finding those other people who might have read something that is sort of in your window that you might not have heard about before. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like Rupi Kaur, she is now this Canada's poet, and I believe she started just by writing Instagram poems, right? So, it's a whole different world out there that some of us are still getting used to. But I mean, ultimately it's a positive thing. If you can have more outlets for your writing, and if you can reach writers and connect with writers in different ways, that's, it's only going to be good, I think.
So reading, should that be part of your ritual or schedule or both? I'm saying that because for some people, not me so much, but for some people, they only have so much time. So,
Well, if that's the case, then definitely it should be part of a ritual. Again, Ray Bradbury had said that, he writes a short story every week and reads a short story every night before bed. So, if you have a busy schedule and you need to schedule writing, then by all means, schedule it in. Excuse me. I think really what Stephen King said, and what I believe as well, is that, unless you're a reader, you can't really be a writer. You have to be a reader. And that maybe, once you get to a certain age, maybe that doesn't mean you have to read every single day. It's, I would think, much more important when you're growing up, and for new writers especially. But yeah, I mean, reading, like I said in the workshop, it's like exercise for your brain. It's a way to keep your brain sharp and help you. So when you are writing, you have more of the tools to be able to do it. You have more of the instincts of story structure and character building, and depending on what you're writing, poetry, the rhythm, the diction, all that stuff, it's all stuff that you pick up as you read. So yeah, really important for sure. And if you need to schedule it, then schedule it. So instead of writing an hour a day, say you're going to read half an hour a day and then write half an hour a day, or vice versa, whichever works. Yeah, for sure.
My question is that a gnome chess set behind you?
No, actually, that's is it called Shona? It's from Zimbabwe anyway. It's soapstone pieces from when
Okay, thank you. I was just so curious. Distracting.
in Africa. That was our honeymoon, was backpacking for
Nice.
7 months. So yeah, that was one of the things we brought back. Yeah, it is nice. Thanks.
Slightly off topic, but
Anyone else with any questions at all? Geez, I thought there'd be like a ton of them. That's why I gave so much time for questions. I did another similar workshop a few years ago about freelance writing, basically. And yeah, we ran over time. So I thought, oh, this time I'm going to make sure we have plenty of time for lots of questions. So
Well, it's because you did such a good, thorough job.
that must be it. Thanks, Phil. I covered everything.
I find my questions come 4 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
I was going to comment about your pottery analogy,
Oh, go right ahead.
because I'm a potter as well. So your wife trims a lot of her pots after she's done them. Otherwise, they would look bad. And the trimming of the clay is kind of like how we trim our words as well to make it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
More
You're getting a little too technical on the pottery side for me. I honestly don't know a whole lot about it. But I know that she obviously, yeah, she does trim pots. So that's a good analogy as well.
And it's huge. You can't really even sell an untrimmed pot. It would just kind of be this flat thing that would, you need to give it elevation to make it, give it the shape off the bottom.
Yeah.
Kind of how we trim words to make our writing
And then depending on
the
how
beautiful thing that it needs to be.
Exactly. And another thing about pottery too is that the best pots usually are the lightest ones.
Right.
So that trimming, that making them lighter, just like making whatever you're writing as tight and compact and as light as possible.
Right.
That's a huge thing.
And you start with lots of clay and you trim most of it away. Kind of like with words too. You start with lots of words. It's hard to trim them. I remember reading somewhere that I think it was Hemingway that said, "Write drunk but edit sober."
Yeah, I've heard that one. It sounds like Hemingway, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's cool. So you have 2 creative outlets then. I'm
not a potter anymore because I had a stroke. So, but I can write with one hand. So that's good.
Oh, there you go.
I'll get back to pottering one day.
Yeah.
Again, it's just going to take me a little while. So now I'm just trying to do writing as my creative outlet.
Oh, nice.
Yep. And I totally agree with you about reading. So I've been trying to write my memoir, and I do a lot of reading of autobiographies, and I've been impressed of all the different types of writing people do.
Yeah.
Some of it is almost poetic memoirs as people write stories of what happened to them. And the most recent one I wrote was called The 29th Day. It was about these young boys that were on this canoe trip that got attacked by a bear. And the way he describes his bear attack is so poetic. It's beautiful. And it's kind of really opened up my horizons about the type of memoir I want to write and making sure I'm adding. And Vera, I want to thank you for the last time we were on one of these workshops. You recommended I read a book called, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. It was about
the fairy tales, disability, and then the fairy tales. It's been very eye-opening for me. Read all those books, and that was helpful.
Yeah,
Kinda
well,
got
that's
me
the
on
thing
a
too,
path.
especially when you're doing something as specific as memoir.
Yeah.
You know, there's a million different ways to write your story, and sometimes you
There
don't
sure
always
is.
know how to do it. And if you see what other people are doing and how they're successful with
Right.
it, then
Right.
you know, that can trigger ideas in you as well.
Right. And you can see patterns of kind of structure of how people recommend you start memoirs, or that they've been following a certain person's recommendations of how they start the story and what they jump into.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And some people write memoirs and put all sorts of kind of poetry and mixed in with it. Some people just write the story and they jump back and forth to all sorts of different aspects of their life. So that's been so helpful to me, reading all these different memoirs, people's autobiographies, stories that have happened. So I agree with you about the reading part.
Perfect. Well, good luck with your writing. I hope
Thank
it
you
goes
so
well.
much.
And good luck with the reading.
Yeah, the reading is easy. It's the writing that's harder.
Well, that's usually the case.
Yeah.
We have a question here in the chat from Jen. It says, hi, for someone me new to writing other than academic essays, would you have any suggestions to start with? Poetry, short stories, etc., or try one kind per week, something like that? I really, that's a tough one. I think, again, it goes back to, you know, what are you interested in? What types of writing do you want to do? If you are used to academic writing, then, you know, one obvious answer is to do creative nonfiction, because it's going to be very similar. You're writing about facts. The style and tone will be different, but it'll be the closest to academic essays. But then, you know, maybe you want to stay right away from academic essays and go into something like short stories or experimental poetry or something. I don't know if there's a clear answer to that. I think really it comes down to what interests you the most, and what do you want to you know, what path do you want to follow, and trying one thing per week. That sounds like a good strategy as well. You know, it's always good to try different things and see what works for you. It's interesting because there's so many writers. I remember as a kid, I thought, okay, I'm going to be a writer. And that to me always meant writing books. And then when you grow up, you realize that, you know, it could be poetry. It could be like I'm doing marketing writing, journalism, you know, there are a million different types of writing. So it's interesting how someone can, you know, like one type of writing, but not another type. I kind of like everything. I'm more drawn to, well, in my non-work stuff, fiction writing. I've written poetry, but not a whole lot. But yeah, if poetry speaks to you, then certainly try writing poetry. The other advantage with poetry too is that, you know, it tends to be shorter. So when you get into short story writing or novel writing and that sort of thing, obviously they're longer pieces. So like we were talking about before with the easy win, you know, maybe poetry is the way to start and then work on other things from there. But yeah, really, you can't go wrong. Whatever you want to try to start with, I think will work fine. Well, and someone said pottering around is offensive to some of us. I apologize. I wasn't actually trying to say pottering. I think I mixed it up with the pottery. I was trying to say puttering. But in any case, apologies for anyone who was offended by that. Oh, and then Annette said the book may have been called Disfigured by Amanda Leduc.
Right. I read that. It was so great.
Well, there you go.
There's another example of a writer that just kind of did whatever was in their heart, put two things together. You wouldn't normally think of those two things, but it was so insightful.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how those things can sometimes come together and you think, oh, how does that work? But for some reason it does. I know it's happened to me. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but yeah. And I mean, those are the books that get published too. Those are the ideas that get published, is putting those weird things together that, sometimes work. So, yeah.
Can I just throw something in here
yeah,
with
go right
regard
ahead.
to Jen, who would like to start writing something creative instead of work related? Everyone knows that you know your own story. So sometimes writing a creative memoir is the easiest thing to do because you already know the story. And then you draw in all the creative details you want, like where you were, the smell in the air, the sound of things, all of that.
Yep.
That's one of the easiest things to do.
Right.
And I taught a course in poetry as memoir. So I had people write a memoir piece, and then I had them draw a poem from that.
Wow.
And if they were really
Wow.
good, I had them do a haiku.
Yep.
Well, not good, but enthusiastic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, those are good points too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think of memoir, but yeah, you're right. If you're drawing from your own story, then that's that's a good way to sort of ease your way into
Yep.
anything. And and then with that too, you could do, it could be a straight memoir. You could do a short story that's, loosely based on your own life. You could write a poem that's based on your own life. Yeah, yeah. That's that's good. Yeah, thanks, Vera.
Yep.
I heard a word twice and I don't know what it is. Haiku.
Oh, haiku.
Haiku.
Haiku. It's a type of poetry. It's Vera, is it Japanese in origin?
Yeah.
Yes, it's Japanese.
Yeah, and it's 3 lines. And Vera, you explain. I
Okay.
better not.
Let me do that.
There you go.
It's Japanese genre. There are several threads that go from haiku, but haiku, it used to be traditionally 7-5-7. So 7 syllable, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Now it's more North American to write it as 9 to 13 syllables. So, and you can split your lines as long as it's short, long, short. Or you can write, there are 2 kinds. Oh, don't get me started.
Yeah.
There's nature haiku and human haiku. So if you write a little nasty tidbit about someone, it's a senryu, which is a human haiku.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question about motivation.
Sure,
So
go ahead, Karen.
when the cookies are gone and the chocolate is finished and you just don't feel it, how do you continue?
Well, this is interesting that the cookies for me aren't actually motivational. And I know it sounds that way. And I mean, they can be motivational. For me personally, it's really not motivational at all. It's just, for me, the cookies are something that's special and just something that, again, it's the same thing time after time after time. So it's the
Ritual.
the ritual, the repetitiveness of it. But motivation, that's a whole different kettle of fish. Motivation, I think if there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but let's say that you're working on something and you're losing motivation in that particular piece of writing or that project. Often what's good is, just put it away, put it aside, start something different. Maybe you'll come back to it. Maybe you don't. Hopefully you do. And that would be the goal, is that you put it aside for a while, let it rest, let your mind rest, let your mind play with something different. but quite often too, and I've experienced this personally, is that, you know, I'll be working on a project. This happened to me just a couple months ago. I was working on a project. I was really into it, really liked it. And then one day I didn't like it. I didn't think it was going anywhere. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. And I thought, well, you know, I've committed this much time. Should I just keep going with it? And I decided, no, you know, it wasn't worth it. It was, it was an idea I liked at the beginning, and I worked on it, and it just didn't go where I wanted to go. So I don't want to be, you know, I don't want to say that you should drop the project necessarily. It's just sometimes people do have problems dropping a project that really they have lost motivation in. So, you know, that's a really broad question. It would depend if you're lacking motivation in one particular project, or if you're lacking motivation in writing in general. You know, if it's lacking motivation in general, then you know, there's a few things you could do. You could again, reading in your genre, that will help, because you know, it'll spark inspiration and motivation, and also be informative about how to write within your genre. What else could you do? You know, maybe review why you like writing in the first place. You know, is it something that brings you joy, or is it something that you feel a sense of accomplishment when you finish something? You know, when you realize what it is about writing that you like, I think you'll have an easier time trying to get that motivation back. Are there any other details you want to share? Maybe I can help more directly.
No, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay. No problem. As I say, that's a pretty broad topic, but yeah, but motivation is extremely, obviously it's extremely important. And again, if, you know, motivation is sometimes dragged down by all those things that we talked about in the workshop, you know, the self-doubt and the fears and that sort of thing. So quite often a way to increase your motivation is to decrease all those stressors and bad things that you think about, and, you know, doing the rituals and you know, just not thinking too much and just writing. Sometimes that just helps as well. Yeah, perfect. Thanks for the question, Karen.
Thank
I
you.
have
Sorry
a,
to jump.
oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Vera.
I was just going to say, you know, I have 6 rough drafts of a novel, like different novels, and I am not a rewriter. And I have finally just accepted that I'm never going to do it. And they're on my hard drive, and they're just resting. And I'm not going to do it, but I do write a lot of poetry, a lot of short story, and a lot of creative nonfiction.
Yep.
So, you know, once you find something you can actually do and accomplish it, then it's a lot more satisfying.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Everybody's meant to write a novel, you know, in spite of what everyone says.
But there's nothing wrong with trying either, and there's nothing wrong with you know, again, it goes back to what are your long-term goals. If your long-term goal is to finish a novel, then, well, maybe you should finish the novel. If your long-term goal is to just have fun while you're writing, then it doesn't matter where it goes, or if it goes anywhere. You know, that's perfect. And Vera, it sounds like you have it perfectly laid out. You know, you've had that enjoyment writing those 6 novels, and you know that for you, finishing them isn't going to bring you any more joy. So go on to something
I'm
else.
done.
Go on to your poetry, go on to your short stories. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And in terms of writing memoirs, there's a really great memoirist named Marion Roach. And if you look her up, she has courses. She's got a great book out on it. And she's really one that would help. I'm using her right now and write a memoir that I'm writing. Well, it's not a memoir because I'm writing it about another person. So what's that? Biography.
Biography, yeah.
Yeah. But it really helps. She's really good.
Yeah, and there's
Thank you. I'll check that out.
Okay.
yeah, there's a lot of interesting niches in the internet. You'll find a lot of good people like that. And hey, there's another vote for the writers group too. You get together with a bunch of writers and you ask a question like, oh, where can I find out information about this? And then, Phil pipes up and says, well, I know this one writer, and yeah, that's perfect.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Graham, how would you respond to somebody who's asking you, so what's your novel about? What's your book about? So I have a hard time kind of making it very short. As Vera knows, I love to talk, but I have a hard time explaining it in like a really good, one sentence. I find it, how do you define that one sentence that would go, wow, without giving away the secret, right? Like, I mean, I would not give it away, but how would you position yourself to write that one sentence, or to just kind of explain without, it's about a blah, 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 blah. After this third blah, they may want to hear it, but it's going a little further than what you would like to kind of give them a little, just to have like a little idea of it. How do you go about doing that one sentence?
Well, usually I tell people, I'm not going to tell you what it's about until it's done. So, but once it is done, what I do is it's almost like an elevator pitch. And another way to look at it too is a movie pitch. They'll talk about you have to describe the movie, and when you're pitching it to the producer, you have to describe it in one word, and usually it's something like Die Hard meets Toy Story 2 or something like that. But yeah, it is easier said than done. And for me, it goes back to that one true sentence. It goes back to, what is the theme of your book? What are you trying to say with your book? And you do, obviously, if there's a twist or something, you don't want to give anything away in that twist, but it's good to focus on the beginning. What's the hook? What is going to draw people in? Is it two people are stranded on a desert island and they need to find some way to get off. You can just write the sentence that quickly. The other way to look at it too is, and you can do this as reference, is when next time you go to the bookstore, read the inside flap of every book, and it's a little longer than one sentence, but it does give you the gist of the story, and it's a bit of an art form. But if you really hone in on what is the core of your book, what is that one truth of the book, that'll point you in the right direction.
Okay, maybe that's where it's a little too vague. Maybe that's why I can't get that sentence out. Maybe that's why. Okay, great. Thank you.
Just say it's about life and death. That'll shut them up.
Well, there's a lot of that in there, too. Yeah, that would work.
Well, and that's interesting too, Louise, because I've read elsewhere too that if you're having a hard time summing up the book in one sentence, then you might be having a hard time writing the book, period. So sometimes it's a good exercise to find out what that one sentence is. And I'm talking about, the one summing up sentence, not the one true sentence, but they amount to almost the same thing, because once you have that in your mind, you might have an easier time writing the book.
That's it. Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
I have to go, Graham. Thanks very, very much.
Oh, no problem. Thanks, Phil.
All righty. Bye,
Hopefully
everybody.
it's helpful. Yeah, we'll see you later.
Okay.
Well, we are getting near the end. Are there any other questions here? Anything that people want to ask?
Well, Graham, I think you did a pretty great job tonight. I know you answered a lot of questions. You've covered a lot of
Good.
ground. And I mean, I, for one, plan to instate the 2 cookie rule for the highlighting going forward. That cup of tea is just too regular. The cookies will make it special.
There
And
you go.
I like the idea of talking about different ways to get rid of distraction and create routine and, you know, that inner voice, that imposter syndrome. I do think you covered a lot of great ground. So I appreciate everything you've shared tonight. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. It's always good to get a feel for what the group is interested in knowing more about too. And as I mentioned, we're going to try to get a survey out to you in the next couple of days just to see what your thoughts are, maybe where we could have talked more on or the like. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. I appreciate that. And again, thank you, Graham.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming out, and hope it was helpful.
It was
Definitely.
great.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks
so
very
much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Graham.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Graham.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Bye.